Hi everyone. This is a new session of PensamENTs. We have the pleasure to have Clarissa Morawski today. I will introduce her very briefly. Clarissa has more than 30 years of experience in waste policies. She has published many articles on different aspects related to waste management and recycling. And she's a top expert on extended producer responsibility and particularly on the use of deposit-refund schemes. Clarissa co-founded the Reloop platform in 2015, where she currently acts as Chief Executive Officer. Reloop is an international non-for-profit comprised of industry, NGOs, and cities that support policies towards circular economy. And in particular, Reloop has the overarching objective of preventing waste, but by means of reduction of production and consumption, reusing packaging, and collecting materials properly for recycling within a closed loop. Today, she will speak, or her conference will be Closing the Loop, Deposit-Refund Schemes Trends Shaping Europe. This is a very timely topic for our audience, particularly in Spain, since, as you know, the Ministry for the Environment announced the adoption of deposit-refund schemes within 2 years. So, Clarissa, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. It's a pleasure for us to have you with us today. And now the floor is yours. You have 35-40 minutes for your presentation, and then we'll pass on the floor to the public for comments or questions. Thanks very much.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I'm going to go right ahead and share my screen. So I think you can see that now. I have a nice long presentation, which I hope will give you a very robust understanding of all of the updates on deposit return around Europe, but also to some extent around the world, because it's extremely relevant. So let's just jump right into it. There we go. So first of all, not going to spend a lot of time on Reloop, but I would advise that when you go to our website, if you see the About Reloop, that will give you a very clear understanding of what we work on at Reloop. We have 5 programs, and when you look at those programs, they're presented like this on our website, and each one you have a green button here. You can click and you can see all of the kinds of work that we do around those programs. Today, we're going to talk about money back, which is the deposit return work that we do. And these days, it's a lot of work because there's a lot of attention on it. And just to touch base with Ignazi, is everything good with the presentation? You see it all okay? Great. Okay. So if you want to know more about Reloop, I highly recommend you go to that part of our webpage. But what you might have heard recently, and this is a key tool for all of you watching this presentation today, is the Reloop What We Waste dashboard. It's an online self-navigation tool that is all about beverage container management around the world. And if you go to our website, you can learn about it. You can get trained on it. It's all free access. There are an incredible array of visual illustrations using real-life data. I'll show you a couple for Spain at the end of the presentation, but it's extremely worth it if you're now engaging in the field of deposit return. This is sort of the place where you can get a lot of data. So that is called the What We Waste dashboard presented by Reloop. Now let's talk about deposit return. And just to give you a little bit of history, where did it all start? It basically started in the 70s with the introduction of single-use beverage packaging. And it mainly started in Canada and the United States as a result of the litter that was happening because of the introduction of single-use packaging. It continued in the 80s in Canada and the United States. And then in the 90s, again, even more so. We started to see sort of Canadian programs expand beyond soft drink and beer to new age beverages like juices, wines, spirits, etc. In the 2000s, we started to see breakthroughs in Europe, Denmark, Germany, etc. And then well into the 2000s, we started to see a lot of smaller jurisdictions picking up, especially coastal countries or territories like those in Australia. If you go to our Global Deposit Book 2024, which was released 2 months ago, it is the most comprehensive resource on deposit programs all over the world. And it's available for free as a PDF. And it's sort of the Global Deposit Bible. And it has a hell of a lot of information on it, so you get a really good understanding of some of the details about deposit return. For example, in the Spain context, you're probably wondering, in your average deposit return program, how much happens manually collected and how much happens through RVMs? Because I know there's always a fear that small shops will be inundated with containers and have to handle them in a manual format. What you'll discover in the Global Deposit Book is, where available, we show you how much is returned via automated and how much is returned via manual in the various countries. And I can tell you, it's generally less than 10% is handled manually. So this is a really important resource for all of you. So what do we know about deposit return? Well, we know that at the end of 2024, about 347 million people will have access to deposit, have access to deposit return. And by the end of 2027, in 3 years, it will go from about 57 jurisdictions to 70, covering about 592 million. And you can see this huge increase here. And why is that? Well, that's because of countries like Spain, like UK, like Poland. These are all big population centers, and they are going to have a huge impact on the amount of people over the world that are covered. Moving on, let's look at some of the existing programs. We're going to focus here on Europe. This is a map of Europe, and this is what the map looked like for existing deposit programs before 2022. And then from 2022 to 2024, we had a whole array of programs being implemented, including, let's start at the beginning. We had Malta, little tiny Malta. We had Hungary and Slovakia, Romania. The Netherlands expanded its program to include cans and large PET, the Republic of Ireland. So we saw a lot of new programs, and therefore we have a lot of very good experience that we can learn from, especially in the case of implementation in Spain. Oh, and I didn't mention Austria, which is somewhere here. Down here, one example is Austria just introduced DRS, and Austria did an incredible job of working together to make sure that they could do it properly on time, which was the 1st of January. It's a model that should be followed by Spanish or companies selling into the Spain market, as well as the retailers. They should look at Austria as a good working example. When we look at the return rates in Europe, here you can see all of the rates, and here you can see the median and the average. So these are good numbers. You can see that we're upwards of almost 90, and those are not soft numbers. Those are real numbers. And I will say to you that they're only going to go up. This low one here is Latvia. It's just a brand new program. The next time we record the data, whoops, it will be much higher. Same with the Netherlands. They just introduced their expansion. This too will go up. And Malta as well. It's a brand new program. So what we're seeing is the programs that are being implemented are doing extremely well, and they're going to increase that average. And I think that the next time I produce this table or this bar chart, it's going to show you an average or a median of 90% or more. So why is this so important? Well, it's about connecting waste to climate change. So when we talk about waste, it is a waste crisis, but it also is directly connected to climate change. And it's part of the beauty of deposit return programs is it actually satisfies the triple, it's not just two things, it's the triple planetary crisis. It's not just climate change, it's not just waste and pollution, but it's also an impact on biodiversity in terms of containers ending up in the environment, with a particular focus on plastics in the sea. So when we have a deposit return program, we actually have a dual impact. We're not only getting to 90, but by collecting such clean material and having control over what it gets recycled into, We have the ability to take those containers and closed loop recycle them, can to can, bottle to bottle. And that dual impact is something that we've called at Reloop Target 90. It's about getting at least 90% of the containers and then recirculating them into closed loop applications. And we ran the math on it. We took the numbers and we brought them to industry and the European Commission. And we showed how a Target 90 approach can deliver critical benefits to climate, environment, and for businesses across the member states. And it would require 90% collection and high levels of recycled content. And if you want to see that study, I showed it to you earlier. It's on our website. Take a look at it. It has all the 10 and 20-year cumulative impacts on beverage brands if they want to take advantage of all of the material that can be recirculated back into their packaging. So powerful was this story that Reloop was able to build a coalition in Europe with brand owners and recyclers that also supported the concept of the need for a 90% separate collection for recycling target and adopting effective DRS in member states that fell short from the 90. This is this powerful coalition. And you can see, I don't know if these look familiar to you, but Unesta is soft drink of Europe. Natural mineral waters is mineral water of Europe. Here you have juices of Europe. Here you have brewers within different countries in Europe. You have recyclers. You have NGOs. It was a very powerful coalition that prepared a joint paper and lobbied together, holding hands. And I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it is very rare that you get a big industry coalition that is working with NGOs together to move an ambitious policy forward. And we even shared communications materials like this, for example, that all the members of the Alliance were able to put out on social media during the time that the packaging and packaging waste regulation was being negotiated. And here's another example. And it was very focused on the target and deposit return. We also wanted to show in our communication material that, as you know, countries are different. And some of them do have reuse targets or policies in place. And to make the point that a deposit system can serve for both reusables, refillables, and single-use containers. Because it is a collection system. And whether you are collecting and sorting and recycling and repurposing into closed-loop recycling, or collecting, cleaning, inspecting, and refilling, it can be one system servicing all of those different types of packaging. We were successful, and of course, the packaging and packaging waste regulation was adopted at the end of 2024 and published just last month. And I will just add that the legal provisions in Article 50 are nearly exactly what the coalition proposed. Without walking you through it for too long, this is the legal provision of Article 50. So we're talking 90% by 2029. And also an important point, especially in Spain, is this target is called collection for recycling. It's actually a separate collection for recycling. Unlike recycling, that includes any metal that you can get from an incinerator and recycle. The collection for recycling rate does not include any metal that is captured from an incinerator in Spain or anywhere else. It also does not include any PET bottles that have been separated from mixed waste or residual waste, la basura. No. We very much support mixed waste sorting at Reloop, but the target does not include any bottles. So while you might have a higher recycling rate for cans, for example, because you're recovering from your incinerator, it doesn't necessarily at all mean that it's a separate collection for recycling rate. So that's a very, very important note that impacts metal cans that are going to incinerators or plastic beverage bottles that are being extracted from mixed waste sorting. And I know there are mixed waste sorting facilities in Spain, so when we think about getting to 90, it will be without those mixed waste sorted bottles. Next, Let's talk about the next 2 years. I showed you what we've had in the past, which countries have joined. Now let's take a look at the new countries, all of these guys in blue here, okay? We have 6 new countries and 1 expansion. How well has it gone? And just to say that in the last 2 years, we've gone from DRS covering 29% of the European Union population to 41%. Let's show you how it's gone. Let's start with Slovakia, that was the first adopter in January 2022. This is about litter. And what you can see here is that litter for both cans and PET represented approximately 20 and 15% of total litter collected. And after the deposit return program was introduced, about 18 months later, it went down to 2 and 3%. And you can see the visual here. So a very rapid impact on beverage container litter. This slide shows you by year the per capita. This is just for PET. I could do it for glass, or you could do it yourself. This is all from the dashboard. It shows you what bottles were being wasted, incinerated, landfilled, or littered in that country. And you can see that right after the deposit return program was introduced, they went from 45 containers wasted down to 8. This is for PET in a matter of 2 years. For the whole year. That is, that's huge. That's like almost 6 times less waste production for those containers. Now let's look at Latvia. In Latvia, looking at coastal sites, they saw a decrease of, in total, 56% by count from before the DRS to after the DRS, about a 2-year period. And down here, you can see them by container type. So for plastic bottles, a 61% reduction after the deposit return program was introduced in terms of beach litter. Again, hugely effective. Now let's look at waste per capita. Again, in Latvia, they started at 57 before DRS. 2 years into the program, they've more than halved their waste production of PET bottles. Let's go to Malta. I don't have the litter stats in Malta, but I can show you the wastage per capita. They went from 290 per person in Malta down to 70 after 1 year. Very impressive. Netherlands, again, they had a deposit, they expanded the deposit, but here you can see the litter. Sorry, I'm just seeing a face there. Here you can see the litter reduction, 30, 65, and if you look at the entire thing, about 70% compared to 2017 to 2020, looking at the average of the 3 years, about a 70% decline of plastic bottles. And you can also see that for cans, even though it's very, very new still, they saw a 33% reduction. So a massive litter reduction. Republic of Ireland, very new program, just 1 year old, but they also saw that within sort of 5 months, a 30% reduction on cans, 20% reduction on plastic bottles. So you can see that these systems for litter work exceptionally well. So that's what happened in the last 2 years. And I would highly advise that, those countries, a lot of them introduced their programs within 2 years, some of them even quicker. So there's sort of a sequence of activities that has to happen in order to have an efficient implementation. And I would highly recommend that the Spaniards take a look at those countries and see what lessons are learned so they can cut a bunch of corners and not have to experience some of the downsides as well. Okay, so we looked at the last 2 years. Now let's look at the next 2 years, 2025 right through to the end of 2026. Austria is introduced. It's going well. As I said, they did an extremely good job working together, the value chain, to make sure it happened properly. We've got Portugal, Greece, Poland, and Spain, all having to be implemented in the next 2 years. So let's take a closer look then, shall we? These are the 4 countries that are on the map for introduction. This is where a lot of attention will be focused in the next 2 years. Let's take a look at Spain. Again, This is from the dashboard. So you can go to our dashboard right now and you can pull up this information yourself. This is interesting because it shows you the sales of beverage packaging in Spain over the last 20, 30 years. And you can see here the rise in cans. Spain is a real can market. And you can see here also the rise in PET, but also the rise, frankly, in some refillable bottles that took a bit of a dive. This V's here, this is COVID. So this is interesting. The other interesting thing is that about 26% of market share is non-refillable PET, and that hasn't changed much in the last 15 years. For refillables, which is mainly glass, also in 2010 it was 23%, and now it's approximately 20%. So a small decline, but nowhere near as big a decline as we've seen in other countries, because there's a good, healthy reuse market in Horeca. And this is just to show you what happened during COVID. There was, of course, a huge drop in sales, overall of 11%. But of course, what's interesting is that, and you can see that right here, during COVID, cans actually increased a significant amount during that period of time. So there's a little bit on the Spain market. Now let's look at waste. This is, again, is from the dashboard. And here you can see that over the period 2015 to 2024, Spain was the third largest waster of both cans and PET bottles compared to other countries, except for Italy and Spain were slightly worse than them. So you can see that there is a lot of work to be done in Spain. This is a slightly complicated chart, but a lot of these colored countries are countries that have a combination of deposit return and or a large refillable market share. The red countries are those that don't have DRS and don't have high refillable of more than 25%. And of course, these are wasted per capita rates. This is the number of containers per year that are wasted. And here you can see Spain is nearly at the back of the pack, along with Greece, Bulgaria, and Hungary. So again, I don't want to embarrass Spain, but I just want to emphasize the scale of the problem. And finally, and this is just because I live a 5-minute walk from the Sagrada Familia, if you were to look at in 2024 alone, Spain wasted about 10 billion units of glass, bottles, metal cans, and PET, which could fill up the Sagrada Familia 1.6 times. Okay. So now enough of Spain, let's look at the world. So here on the left, you have in yellow the countries that are scheduled to introduce in 2025 and 2026, Uruguay, Singapore, Queensland, and Tasmania. And then in the next 2 years, Cyprus, Moldova, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales, probably, but there's still some contention around Wales. But I think what's important here is England, because that is the bulk of the population of the UK, Serbia, and Kosovo. So there will be a lot of focus on the UK over the next 3 years as well. They'll be going through the same process that Spain is going through. A couple of things before I begin to wrap up that I want to bring your attention to. As Spain is considering how to set up collection in a way that's going to really drive consumer participation, I want to bring your attention to this fact sheet from Reloop. You can get it on our website. It was published in May of 2023. And it did some research on what are the drivers, the barriers, and the implications in terms of consumer participation. And here you can see, you don't need to read this, but we have this amazing chart that looks at what are the key motivators and the key barriers. And there's a lot of interesting stuff here that can help you make sure that you don't miss a beat, to make sure that your customers are incentivized, the consumers of Spain are incentivized and aware and ready to participate in the program, because it's all about getting to 90, is all about making sure that the consumers are participating. So an excellent resource for you. The next one I want to show you is a question that I've been dogged with for 30 years by the beverage brands that suggest that deposit return is going to have an impact on their sales. And, you know, we could say that deposits are not a price increase because you pay the 10 cents and then you get it back. We can say that, but at the end of the day, there's only really one way to look at this, and it's to look at sales before a deposit return was introduced in a country or a state or a province, and sales after, and see if there is an immediate impact or if it has a long-term impact. So this study is available on our website, and I'm not going to go through every single statistical evidence that we've presented. You can go yourself. And I won't even go through these points, but I will tell you in conclusion, this study proves that DRS systems support recycling without harming beverage sales, reinforcing their role as a practical solution for sustainability. So please let us not start thinking that there's going to be a huge impact on sales. Evidence shows that there is none. Now, finally, because of where Spain is, it's always nice to think about how we're going to build a program that is effective in Spain. And when I think about the elements of a successful program, we can look at what we have already operating in Europe, which is somewhere along 15 really well-managed programs that we can look to. And if I were to use the building of a house analogy, I'll leave you with these 3 slides. Or 4 slides. So first of all, let's just think about what the essential requirements are. And obviously, it has to offer convenience and accessibility. It has to drive ecological and economical performance objectives. It has to drive circularity. So what does that mean? It means closed loop, multiple loops, closed loop, 100%. You've got to go for closed loop. You don't want your PET bottles going into blouses and carpets and your cans going into aluminum siding or into engine blocks. You want the cans going into cans and the plastic going into plastic bottles and the glass going back into glass. It's the best use of material for the long-term period, and it's the best use for the brand owners, but also for reuse. I mentioned before, some of the systems in Europe will be mixed DRS, single-use and reusables. A lot of them are already. In the case of Spain, if that is the case, where you're going to want to integrate your refillable glass bottles into the system, then it needs to be a system that is going to drive that kind of circularity. It has to foster innovation and competition at all times, and it has to, of course, fairly compensate service providers. And here, when I say service providers, I'm really talking about the retailers that are going to be tasked with taking back the packaging in their stores. Like in the vast majority of systems around the world, there are handling fees awarded to retailers per container handled. Again, if you want to see all the handling fees across the planet, just type in handling fees and Reloop in Google, and you will get an entire list of all the handling fees for every beverage container in every jurisdiction where we have them and how handling fees are calculated. Okay, let's get back to building the house because I have about 5 minutes left. Let's talk about a house. When you have a house, you have the foundation, you have the framework, and then you have the operations, like the lighting and the plumbing and everything. So let's look at it from that perspective. So let's focus on the foundational piece, the foundation here. And the foundational piece, for the most part, you've got it in place in Spain, and that is a necessary requirement of government. Ideally, meaningful targets and penalties, that's a role of government. A return to retail mandate, that is a role of government, and in this case, it's a role that was given by the European Union because there's a clear return to retail mandate in Article 50, in Article 50 and Annex 10 of the Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation. It should have a minimum of 10 cents minimum deposit, if not more. There should be proper enforcement, and there should be official reporting and oversight. That is the regulatory role, and that is what the regulators need to be very well focused on, not necessarily operations. Now let's continue the building of the house, and let's look at the framework. And again, this framework should be a requirement. Again, we've seen some of these requirements in regulation. If not in regulation, it should be a requirement of the system operator for Spain. We're talking about universal marking so that everybody has the same marking requirements and reading requirements, that registration is connected to the barcode database. There's a design for environment requirements. It's not like a beverage brand can just come in Spain and say, okay, I'm going to put my beverage on the market and you're going to have to deal with it. And it happens to be a purple PET container with a strange label. That is not accepted. There needs to be a limitation for what brand owners can put on the market in terms of packaging. And that message is totally consistent with the packaging and packaging waste regulation, which also stipulates some requirements around recyclability. There needs to be some specifications, minimum specifications for all technology, whether it's small RVM machines or large RVM counting machines. They have to be, to some degree, following a minimum standard. And of course, you also need some high volume manual collection. HoReCa requires some operating minimum requirements to effectively protect HoReCa, so they do get pickups, or they aren't in a large way having to deal with the deposit requirements on their own. And of course, you need some collection point standards in terms of the retailers. You know, they need to be offering return when they're open the same hours and these kinds of things. And I'd be happy to share with you some of those standards. So that's that everybody has to follow, and that should be basic standards right from the get-go. And then finally, we have operations, and this is my last slide, where we have things. This is what the PRO has to do. The organization that the brand owners and the distributors and the retailers, who are also brand owners, are going to have to appoint ideally one system operator, like most jurisdictions have. That's not Germany. It has multiples, but I would highly advise you go with one system operator, and they will ensure that all of these things are done. They will ensure that there's proper technology deployed for the collection network, that contract has an optimized logistics contract, that it's not a bunch of different contractors all running around the country collecting containers, that there is material processing from RVM and manual and HoReCa that is done in a coordinated and consistent manner, that there is consistent material trading, and ultimately that producers have access to that material first and foremost so that they can closed loop recycle it. Proper compliance, reporting, clearing of deposits, and a central registry database management. Again, this is not new. This is classic operational requirements that most producing responsibility organizations running deposit return systems are operating under in a DRS. And with that, I'm going to stop. It's been half an hour, and I'd be happy to stop sharing my screen and have a conversation.
Thanks, Clarissa, for your very comprehensive talk. It's been very interesting. Now we'll pass on the floor to the audience for questions. We have a couple of them in the chat from Beran Pakachi and Mats Holmeyer. Maybe you can raise your hand or take or I can read them as you wish. If you are still
I know I can read them. So the first one is, how do you calculate return rates? Is this the formula, returned beverage containers over? Well, it's typically the terminology we use is collected or refunded in a deposit system. So that would be every single container that a deposit was paid out for, over the amount of units placed on the market. And placed on the market is the official term used in regulation, POM, which effectively represents sales. So that's sales direct to retail, sales through the internet, 24 cans coming in through the internet, that's counted, as well as sales to HoReCa. It should represent all sales. That is how you calculate. Is there already a DMO announced for Spain? I think that maybe I can get a second comment, but I believe that it's meant to happen at the end of May, I think. And I would only say that it's really key that you stay on target in terms of your timelines and your milestones. The DMO, which is going to be the system operator for the Spanish program, has to be given its mandate as soon as possible because it has a lot of work to do. And if it's May, make sure it happens in May, and don't let anyone derail the timeline, because of course there are always interested parties in derailing it a little bit and delaying and derailing. Don't let it happen. I will tell you, the European Court of Justice has given a 1 year window. They are saying that it's 1 year is enough to implement a DRS. Spain has or will have had about 2 years. That should be enough, as long as you stay on track and you go through the milestones that need to be gone through. I mentioned Austria as an excellent process. Keep at it, and you could actually have your program implemented by the end of 2026. Do I think a 10 cents deposit for Spain can get outdated quickly? I don't think 10 cents is enough, but I recognize the pressures. I think that I would rather see a 20-cent deposit, and that way we know that the program would be utilized in the best case possible. One of the things that you kind of want to avoid is where you have a big waste picker collection network in a jurisdiction where you don't really need it. In Spain, you can have consumers returning their containers. If it's 10 cents, it will be like a tax on consumers. If this country wants to go in that direction and have the vast majority of the containers collected by waste pickers, that's a decision that you can make. That's the way it works in America, actually, because they have a 5-cent deposit. It's probably going to be the way it's going to work in the Global South, and the waste pickers will be part of the program. But in Europe, and I would say even in Southern Europe, that is not the way to go. We want to give consumers back their deposit. It might be 10 cents. I think it should be higher, but even if it's 10 cents, you want to make it as easy as possible, and you want that to be a motivator. If it's not a motivator, you will see it very quickly. You will see cans that are still slightly littered. You will see cans ending up in mixed waste sorting facilities and incinerators. So I would recommend something higher. Pros and cons of the variable deposit. Okay. Variable deposit means that you have different deposit levels, like 10 cents for cans and 20 cents for big PET bottles. That's a variable deposit. Versus one deposit, where like in Germany, 25 cents, doesn't matter what it is. We have a fact sheet on this at Reloop. Just type in variable deposit, Reloop, and it'll pop up. We found that, I'm just trying to read the question here. There isn't really a big difference when it comes to variable deposits. We feel it's very much a political decision. But jurisdictions with variable deposits, without variable deposits, are seemingly getting similar performance targets. So we don't have a position on it, but I know that for some stakeholders, it's an important issue. Yeah, read our fact sheet on variable deposits. Let's see now here.
Maybe I could jump in and ask a question.
Sure.
Perfect, thank you. So first of all, thank you, Clarissa, for the speech. As someone from one of the states in the US that have instituted collection, these deposit schemes, yeah, as you've mentioned with the canners, the trash pickers, these are kind of vulnerable populations that, of course, need to be included in the dialogue, because at the end of the day, it seems, if I'm understanding you correctly, it seems like the price of the can should be carefully balanced, so it's not too valuable, but not, or rather, people should be incentivized to return their own can, as opposed to perhaps creating these vast networks of canners. But at the same time, these kind of micro markets are inevitable, especially in major cities where there's a lot of tourism, etc. So I'm wondering if you could provide a reference point for either jurisdictions that are working closely with the canner communities, or associations that are kind of working with those canners to give them the protections they need to do this, to do their job. Because at the end of the day, it is a very precarious line of work.
Yeah, so the canner situation, as I said, it's not very dominant at all in Europe, at all, in any of the jurisdictions. It's sort of it's a foreign issue for European countries. It is very present in America, as you said, primarily because there's a 5-cent deposit, primarily because retailers have not fulfilled their obligation to take back, or if they have, it's so dirty and gross that your average person just doesn't want to redeem a container. It's a program that has eroded over many, many years. So I wouldn't say that's the perfect model, because even in those situations, the canners or the waste pickers are unfairly treated. They're having to show up going into grocery stores with heaps and heaps of cans, which isn't good for them. It's not good for anybody else. Because it's not an issue here, our North American approach, let's just call it, is that high volume return access, where we can actually send canners with their large volume material to a separate facility located usually in the urban center that can take large volumes fairly quickly. We've seen a few of the RVM companies develop what they call professional lines, which are in a small footprint where you can dump all the containers and you can get paid back quite quickly in real time. These are some of the things that we're seeing in North America. We could see them also in the global south, but typically we don't see them much in Europe, just because in Europe we don't have waste pickers as part of the model. Now, I'm not saying that that won't happen in Spain, but I don't think that if it's not an existing system where you want to protect the individuals that are making a livelihood off collecting containers, I'm not sure that's the place you want to start in Spain. I think where you want to start is being fair to consumers and charging them something that they can easily get back. And that's how the proper deposit return program works. Otherwise, it's just a tax ripoff. So I fully respect the waste pickers, and I think they do an incredible job in America and also in the global south, and they probably will in Uruguay as well. But in Northern Europe, it's just not as relevant.
Thanks, Clarissa. We have 2 more questions in the chat by Sergio Sastre and Gemma Noales.
Okay, how many resources are needed? Well, what you're talking about is the administration. So in a proper PRO or a deposit return operator, we have about 13 of these companies. They're not-for-profit companies. They have a board of directors that is typically represented by the brands and the retailers. And these companies are working on behalf of those stakeholders to properly implement a program that works really well and is highly efficient. Because at the end of the day, it's the producers that profit off beverage containers that are going to be paying the net costs of the system. And that's why these organizations are fairly efficient. How many people work in these organizations? I don't know, maybe like, this is random. I don't know, maybe someone can type it in, but maybe 25, 30, depending. I'm thinking of like Lithuania and Latvia and Slovakia. Maybe as you have a much larger country, there are more, but it's not a huge organization. And there's a lot of it is automated in terms of the databases that are kind of operating the system. Let's see this one here. How is litter reduction calculated? Basically, you go to, before the deposit return program is introduced, you do auditing, you do litter cleanups of different sites. Typically, they're coastal cleanups, but they might also be areas where you have a large generation of litter, like around universities and schools and parks, etc. And they do some assessment before, and then they do assessment after the deposit is introduced, and they compare the difference. That's typically how they're done. The next question is about transparency on data, put on the market overall. Sure. The question is, how many units are sold in Spain? And currently that data is being transferred to EcoEmbas because it's part of their obligation to pay fees on the packaging. So the data should exist. The data will not be made transparent. You will not know how many bottles Coke sells, but what you will know through the PRO running the DRS is what the total number of PET bottles were sold, what the total cans were sold, and the total cartons were sold. That information will be public. In fact, in most cases, and that's where we get our data for the Global Deposit Book, there is an annual report put out by the organization that runs the DRS that has in the financials, it shows you exactly how much money they brought in based on how many sales. So we can align things. They'll tell you how much does a producer selling a PET bottle pay in terms of the cost per unit. And you can sort of run the math, but they're all numbers that are rolled up. So you'll never get to know what one producer is selling, but it would be all of the PET, all of the cans, for example. And we want that to be transparent. Of course, it has to be transparent. But as I said, it's quite transparent with the deposit systems that we already have, especially those ones that are centralized with one system operator. Germany is an outlier. There isn't one system operator. It's completely decentralized. We are told by the government that it's 98%, but I would say it's a soft number. We actually don't have real veracity around that number. It's much easier when there's one system operator that reports. You can get a lot more transparency there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I have one question myself, Clarissa.
Yeah.
In principle, the system that is going to be implemented in Spain will include also not only plastic bottles, but also cans and Tetra Pak. So as far as I know, it's not so common that Tetra Pak is included in the Deposit-Refund scheme. So what can you say about that? Do you think it's a wise decision to have included that stream?
Does it include milk?
I don't think so.
Okay. So the first thing you need to understand, if it doesn't include milk, if you look at the entire universe of single-use beverage containers, the Tetra Pak, not including milk, so like juice, comprises less than 5%. Okay, so that's the first thing. It's a very, very small share of the total mix. That's the first thing that you need to know. I also think that Tetra Pak is definitely a material that could be considered for deposit return expansions in other countries. So having Spain doing it might be a really nice test case. The question is really about the technology. Do we have the technology that can take it? And just to say that, you don't need to have a separate, think about an RVM. You don't need to have a separate bin for just Tetra Pak off the back of the RVM in the store. As I said, it's only 5%. It's tiny. You can mix those Tetra Paks in with the cans. You can mix them in with the PET. You can do a whole array of different mixing because at the end of the day, the material that goes from the RVMs in the shops is going to go to a counting center where it's already counted, but it's going to be sorted with traditional MRF sorting equipment. So it's going to go through a sort anyway, which means that we can experience a lot of efficiencies at the collection end. So Tetra Pak, the way I see it, is not really that big an issue. The question is whether the machines can take it. I'm not sure if there are any machine people on the call, but I understand that there are some advances in machine technology, and all of the companies that are in the machine business are making improvements to their machines because they know that eventually containers like Tetra Pak will probably be added to these systems. So I think it's going to be an interesting test case, but as I said, it's a tiny share of the material, and it shouldn't derail any progress because it's this big compared to all the bottles and cans that are in the system.
Thanks. There is
No
one
milk.
question
Okay.
from Gemma.
Okay, so what problems can arise when involving small and medium-sized stores, storage space, changing the cashier system, etc. Again, I would just say that in most of the European jurisdictions, even the small stores have been managing, if they get involved with the system operator, they show them how to do it, and then they do it. As I said, if you go to the Global Deposit Book, you will see the share of material that gets returned through small stores. It's tiny. It's usually around 10%. So don't be afraid about being a small store and having to manage a wave of beverage packaging. That is typically not how it works. How it works is that most people actually want to deal with a machine. They don't want to deal with a cashier, and they want to just drop off a lot more containers at their big grocery store like Mercadona or Carrefour when they're doing their big shop. That's how it works based on what we see, and we get the data every 2 years. So I don't see it being any different in Spain with the small shops. It's not convenient necessarily if you're going to be returning a lot of containers to be doing it in a small shop.
Clarissa, could you elaborate a bit more on the timeline to introduce deposit refund schemes? This is going to be certainly a controversial issue in Spain. The original timeline was established is established in 2 years, but some actors consider that this is not sufficient. So you said something. Could you elaborate a bit more, please?
Well, all I can say is that there are plenty of countries that had less than 2 years that were able to introduce. It's a lot of work. It means working together. It means following the examples of others and getting it done. As I said, the next step is getting your DMO in place, which should be in May. And that's a really, really important step, because once you have an organization that is a not-for-profit that is serving the brand owners and the retailers to implement, then it can go off quite quickly. They need to figure out, basically you need to put your orders in for the build in terms of any new capital investments that you're doing. You need to know what they are, and you need to put those orders in, and then you need to lay out an implementation plan. And I'm absolutely convinced if it's properly managed, it can be done well. I do live in Spain. I have for about a decade. I know how we do things in Spain, but that's not to say that we can't get it done on time. The return rates in Spain are so bad that even 1 year in delay will have an impact of billions of wasted containers, of millions of euros in material revenue that was not earned because they ended up in an incinerator or in a landfill. So you don't want to delay it. What you want to do is you want to work together, figure out where the problems are, how other jurisdictions dealt with it, and make some firm decisions and move forward. And I just want to say that there is, I talk a lot to big brand owners now because they're all engaged in this, both in the soft drink, in the water, and in the beer markets. And they want to see this happen properly. They don't want to experience delays. They want it done the way it should be done. They've all gone to Norway and Lithuania and Estonia and seen best in class in Sweden, see how they do it. We've all heard from those system operators on many, many webinars. We have the way forward. It's about tapping into the expertise and making sure that we listen to that expertise, and then we make a decision and we move to the next phase and the next phase and the next phase. Now, Reloop, my organization, as a continuation of the coalition that we had to lobby the European Union to regulate DRS for beverage packaging, a lot of those same companies will now join Reloop in forming a European alliance for best-in-class DRS. And this European alliance, with us being the Secretariat, is there to answer questions and provide educational tools for the civil servants in the different countries, particularly the ones that are on track for implementation, but also the value chain that are dealing with this challenge of having to introduce a deposit return system. So we will be releasing more information about that in about a month. But remember, it's the Alliance for Best in Class, ABC for DRS, and that is coming down the pipe. And it's being asked for and funded by the value chain of companies that want to see this be a success. I don't need to tell you that I know a lot of you have probably been in this fight for a long time and you've seen things happen, but everything's different now. And it's different because the very brand owners that were fighting us years ago and didn't want to see deposit return and wanted to stick with the Echo MBES solution, they have a different viewpoint now. And the viewpoint is different because these companies need to put recycled content in their beverage packaging. They all know, there's no dispute, that recycled content in a can, in a plastic bottle, and in a glass bottle has a significant impact on the carbon footprint of the package. Every brand owner knows this. And all of those three packages have a huge carbon footprint. So we really need to work to reduce their carbon footprint. And in order to do that, we have to collect extremely high amounts, and we have to make sure that they get back into bottles and cans. And that's why the brand owners are much more interested today than they were 4 years ago. It's because they have obligations in Europe, recycled content obligations. And just in case you don't know what they are 25% by 2025 for PET bottles, 30% by 2030, and 60%, 65% by 2040. So this is not small. This is huge. And the reality is it's way better to buy recycled PET from a PET recycler based in Spain. I mean, that's like perfect. Versus getting some recycled PET from Vietnam, Egypt, or Turkey, which is what's happening now, when we don't even know if it's actually, we don't even know anything about it. So, you know, there's something to be said for the security in those purchases by brand owners. It's way better to be purchasing them from the recovered material that is in Spain. So there's a tremendous opportunity for Spanish recyclers here too, or at least those that are doing high quality recycling.
Thanks, Clarissa. Thanks for your wrap up as well. It's been a very informative talk. Thanks for all the information you have shared. This presentation will be online for others to view it. I just want to close by thanking you and by informing everyone that next week, also on Wednesday at 12 o'clock, we'll have kind of second part of this session. We will have with us Víctor Moralo from Ecija Abogados. He will speak, he will focus more on the situation in Spain. He will speak about condiciones legales, obligaciones y acciones de tutela para la implementación del SDR en España. And we hope we can see you there as well. Thanks again, Clarissa. Thanks for your talk.